We'll wait for another 2 or 3 minutes for people
Okay.
to dial in, and yeah,
Okay.
Neha has also dialed in. Hi Neha, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, Aditi. Hi, how are you?
I'm good too. So Srikant has also joined.
Okay.
Hi, Neha.
Hi, Srikant. Nice to meet you.
Where are you based?
Right now, I'm based at Ahmedabad.
Okay.
So I'm working as a faculty at NIPER, that's
Okay.
National Institute of Pharmaceutical Education and Research.
Okay.
All three of us have something in common.
Which is what?
I to
IITK.
Kanpur.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yes. So she's a PhD from BSB, right, Neha?
Yes.
Which year was that?
So I passed out in 13.
Okay. Okay, good. Aditi, when did you do your master's?
I graduated in 2017, Srikant.
17. Okay.
Yeah. We received around 103 registrations for the webinar. So I think
Okay.
people will dial in another 5 or 10 minutes. Usually that's the trend because first 10 minutes we usually bore the audience with normal regular stuff about BIG, and then they start dialing in around 15 minutes past the webinar when the actual segment of the webinar begins. So I think we can start. We've
Okay,
got
sure.
around 22
Sure.
participants. Yeah.
Sure.
Sounds good.
So, yeah, first of all, thank you, Srikant and Neha, for taking time out from your busy schedule and being a part of this segment. And for the audience, so this is the last webinar of our BIG webinar series that SISC has been organizing for last 1 month. And we thought that since BIG evaluation ends with the pitching round, we thought that let's align our webinar session as well along the same line. So we thought that the final nail should be about the art of pitching, and no one does a better job than Srikant. And I've been really honored to know him for last 3 years and honored to work with him in last 5-6 months. So Srikant, welcome to the webinar.
My
And for
pleasure.
the
Thank you,
audience,
Aditi. Hmm.
you're most welcome. So Srikant, he's he has been an entrepreneur, and now he's a startup mentor, advisor. He sits on the board of various reputed incubation centers, including ours. And yeah, he has covered the entire journey that an entrepreneur goes through. So he would be basically covering the a major segment on the pitching, what should be covered, what should not be covered. And Srikant is a regular expert at BIREC meetings, so he knows what are the expectations of the experts who sits on in the evaluation meeting, and would be sharing some of his key insights where uh, you know uh, an innovator, even after having a good idea and data, sometimes fail to make it to the funding scheme. So yeah, let's welcome Srikant for his insights.
Thank you.
And yeah, if any one of you wants to know about BIG, you guys can just go to our YouTube channel. We have already posted all our previous webinars wherein I have covered uh, detailed information about BIG. But still, if we have time towards the end of the webinar, I would be more than happy to walk you through quickly about BIG, and we can like take questions regarding the funding program. But today's session, I thought we would just focus primarily on the nitty-gritties of pitching altogether. So over to you, Srikant. I'll stop sharing my screen, and yeah, you can start.
Thank you. Is my slide visible?
Yes, yes, Srikant.
Okay. So thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure being here. Both SISC and BIRAC and BIG are very close to my heart. And Aditi said she's known me for 3 years. What she did not mention, and she consciously forgot, was to say for the last 3 years, she's been troubling me a lot, getting me to do various things. And therefore, that is one part of the introduction she left out, right, Aditi? Uh, so,
Yes.
what we'll cover today, I mean, I was given this topic called the art of pitching. It's actually, I would believe, the art and science of pitching, but I didn't want to change the topic that Aditi has given. Also, because all of you know the science part very well, since most of you who are pitching for BIG come from some kind of a science background. So I don't need to repeat that. Uh, so therefore, I'm going to focus more on the art part. I must also say that pitching to BIG is very different compared to pitching that you would otherwise do as an entrepreneur to other investors. And I'll explain that as we go along. But with that, it's a pleasure being here today. I will not take up too much time because in most of these sessions, I know that people have a lot of questions. So I want to leave as much time as possible for questions that you may have. And therefore, I will not bore you by going on endlessly with my slides. I do have a few slides. So I want to start a little bit with my journey. Now, it's a bit intimidating and scary for me to talk to an audience of people who come from biosciences, bioengineering, chemical, biomedical background, because yours is a world that is alien to me. Although I am a chemical engineer by training many decades ago at IIT Kanpur, but I'm a chemical engineer who ran away, which means that after my BTech, I did not really do chemical engineering. I went and did an MBA and have largely worked in business roles throughout my career. But somewhere the world has a way of catching up with you, and therefore I have come a full circle. Now I am deeply involved with several bio incubators. I'm involved with BIRAC. तो इसको मेरा प्रायश्चित कह लीजिए. It's a प्रायश्चित where God says you ran away from chemical engineering. I will now make you be deeply involved in things that are close to chemical engineering. So the world has a way of coming back a full circle. That's the way I look at it. I also must tell you that although your world is not a world that I'm familiar with, however, I enjoy certain privileges. So these days, when I go to bio incubators or to a BIRAC meeting, people believe that if this chap is good enough to sit on our committees and mentor our people, he must be a PhD. So a lot of the letters I get, invitations I get, address me as Dr. Sastri. So unlike many people, politicians who get honorary PhDs from various universities, I haven't got any such honor, but I do get called a doctor very often. So I obviously don't pretend I'm a doctor, but I enjoy that moment of glory when I read that email and say, wow, someone's calling me a doctor. I want to run a quick poll, and you can use your chat box to respond. I would like you to just respond and say, do you consider yourself as a scientist or a business person? I'm not giving you a third option. So use your chat box to just respond with a one word answer, scientist or business. I want to take a quick count and see where we are. Dr. Chaitanya, I'm not giving you an option of picking both. You have to, are you predominantly a scientist or a business person? You need to make a choice. So I can see lots of scientists and some business people. Okay, you've done a poll, Aditi. Very good.
Yes. Guys, you
So
can just
yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
vote
So
for the option as well.
So I told you guys that Aditi has the knack of troubling me. So soon after I'd announced the poll and run it halfway, she's introduced a new poll. So that's exactly what I meant when I said Aditi has the knack of troubling me.
I just wanted to make everyone's life easy.
No, I agree with you. Your intentions are never in doubt, Aditi. Okay, so let's see how many people have responded and then we can do a quick count.
So we've got 12 responses for scientists and 4 for business.
Okay, so there are clearly more scientists here today. Not everyone
Yeah.
has responded, but
Yeah.
certainly more scientists than business people. Good. It's good to know because moving forward, uh, so one of the points I want to make is that uh, irrespective of how good each one of us is at our respective areas of work, we may be great scientists with great inventions or great business people with great ideas. But it's important to carry that story to the world. And when I say story, I don't mean fictional stories. I mean, I use the word story in a very positive sense. You need to be able to convey the work that you do in the form of a credible story to the world. And those who tell the stories well are the ones who rule the world, which is why the art and science of pitching becomes so important. And while we certainly don't have the time today to do a full session or workshop on how to construct the story, but I'll try and give you a few pointers in the context of the BIG pitch. I want to put this one number on the screen just to highlight why it is so important to be able to tell a great story. And this number is a number uh, where I actually, for a 2 year period in 2015 and 16, I actually maintained the log of how many presentations I was making to prospective customers or investors. So I'm a co-founder in a big data and AI company out of Singapore, and my partner runs it. But for a 2 year period, I was actually making all the customer and investor calls across India, Middle East, Europe, and US. So I personally made 200 sales and investor calls, and I maintained a log. And the only reason I put up this number is that for each one of you, the BIG pitch is only the start of a long journey. Once you win this grant, as I hope this is the first of many funding awards that you will get, but you will continue to pitch to other investors for the next 3, 5, 10, 15 years. You will call upon doctors, hospitals, other kinds of customers. As a founder of a business, you have no option but to go and make those presentations. And therefore, it becomes a way of life. If you're going to make so many presentations, you might as well perfect the art and the science. And that's the core message I wanted to leave with you, that you can't run away from making a presentation even if you're a scientist, as this audience today predominantly seems to be. You can't get away from making a presentation by saying that someone else in the company will do it, because if it's a big customer or a big investor, they want to hear you speak, the originator of the idea, the owner of the invention. And therefore, you have no option but to go and make that presentation. So, which is why I just believe it's such an important topic. Shifting gears slightly to see what matters at the BIG pitch. While you go to their website and look at the FAQs, or when you actually make the presentation, you'll see different criteria being used. But if I had to distill that into 5 criteria, uh, I would say these are the 5. What matters the most actually is, do you have a great innovation? And it also helps if your innovation has strong IP protecting it. Have you filed a patent? Particularly if you have a great innovation. Now, that innovation needs to be backed by a strong underlying science. Have you validated That's science. It cannot just be a figment of your imagination. What is the validation of that science? So, the first two bullet points that you see in the screen, I would say, are the most important. These are, I would call, describe as necessary conditions. Without that, you really don't have a story. Then, of course, if you have a great innovation with a strong validated science, who's the team working on it? Do they have credentials that sound good? When I talk about that team, it's important that whoever's the inventor, his name should be there. Whoever's supporting that person, that name, those names should be there. Then the BIG is a grant that allows you to move from idea to proof of concept in a certain period of time, 18 months, with a grant of 50 lakhs. So if they're going to give you 50 lakhs, they want to see a roadmap. You have an idea today, which has been validated as having some strong innovation, strong underlying science. But how are you going to take it to proof of concept over the next 18 months? What are the hypotheses that you will validate? What are the steps you will take? I think that's important to spell out. And finally, BIG is meant to support you to move towards commercialization. So even if you're a scientist, it's important to think about how that commercialization will happen. You can't just leave a one liner which says, I will hire a business person who will do it, or I will license my technology and that is my commercialization idea. You should have done some more groundwork. If you're working, if you've got an invention that you think can be licensed out, you need to have some thoughts in place. Have similar products been licensed out in the past? If you're creating some new molecule that can be licensed out to a pharma company, what is the precedence in the market? How do those things work? On the other hand, as many inventors choose to do, they say, look, I'm creating a medical device or a diagnostic kit. I will actually set up a company which will uh, take this product to the market by directly selling it to hospitals, doctors, nursing homes, etc. And then you may have a plan to say that, look, uh, I will go to X number of hospitals and doctors in the next 3 years, then so many more in the next 5 years. So commercialization has to be given some thought as well. But if these are the five, the top two are the most important. I would call them as necessary condition, and the other three are then become the sufficient condition. Uh, Now, I want to focus a bit when I sit at the BIG committee. I see the ones that get rejected and the ones that get accepted. And if I look at, I see both, on the one hand, I see scientists and academicians come and make those pitches. On the other hand, I see people who are non techies, business people come and make those pitches. When I look at each group of people and when I look at scientists and academicians, what is the mistake that I most commonly see? Very often, the scientist or researcher falls so much in love with his scientific study that he will come, or he or she will come with 10, 15, 20 slides on the lab tests that you've done and the results that you got. And you will consume the entire time on just showing those results of the lab studies that you've done, and without paying adequate attention to the path forward of how the proof of concept will happen or how commercialization will happen. So when you fall in love so much with your research and do not focus adequately on proof of concept and commercialization, when you leave the room, the jury reviews it and says, this looks like an R&D type lab project only. Doesn't look like it can go to proof of concept and commercialization, and it gets declined or rejected. So this is the mistake that scientists and academicians make of focusing too much, over much on the lab results without focusing enough on proof of concept and commercialization. On the other hand, when non-tech people walk into the room to make the pitch, very often they make the mistake that when they talk about their innovation, they don't focus enough on the robustness of their innovation from a scientific expertise standpoint, And they talk a lot on about how they will commercialize it, how they will build a team to sell it. They focus on the marketing aspect of it, but not enough on the underlying science, the fact that it's a fairly robust invention. When this person leaves the room, the jury sits back and says, there is no underlying science led innovation here, and this gets declined. So, as you can see, the scientists make one kind of mistake and the non-tech people make another kind of mistake. So you need to have a right balance. So if you go back to the slide, as I said, the first two bullet points represent what I call as necessary condition, and then the other three are what I would call as a sufficient condition. So keep this in mind in terms of the right balance. Having said that, I want to talk to you about 4 success tips that matter for everyone, irrespective of whether you're a scientist or a business oriented person. And I've got a summary here and I will walk through some details after this. The first is what I call a show and tell. If you have an innovation or an invention, find a way to show it, bring it alive. I'll come back to this in a bit later. Second is, I know we are talking serious topics. We're talking science. We're talking uh, biochemistry. We're talking uh, deep tech. And it's serious stuff. And even the jury members, I can tell you that I sit on various investment committees. And because the BIG committee comprises people, if you look at the composition of the committee, until about 3 years ago, they only used to be technical people, professors, deans, directors, scientists, all very serious people. And therefore, you had to have be very serious in that room. But I think it helps to bring in but now over a period of time, they've introduced a few people like me who bring the commercial side of the business. And therefore, it helps to lighten the atmosphere a bit by introducing a small bit of personal story and humor in the innovation that you're presenting, and I'll get into some details of this shortly. Third is the timing of your presentation. Invariably, every person fails to finish the presentation in the allotted 7 minutes, and therefore your story is incomplete. You might have spoken about the validated science part of it, but not about the commercialization, not about the IP. Something gets missed out. And fourth is practice. And I'm going to come get into details of each of this shortly. Let's talk about show and tell. Remember the power of the visual, right? We all of us have heard of the saying which says, a picture speaks louder than 1,000 words. Uh, the biggest mistake you can make is to have slide after slide in small font, packed from top to bottom, very often a visual depiction of the work that you've done. In some cases, if you're working on a device or a diagnostic kit, can you bring a 3D design, even if this is at such an early stage? If you validated some lab results, let there be nice looking graphs. So visual appeal is important. Don't underestimate it, because remember, the hall that you're presenting to the expert committee is a big hall. There's a screen and people are trying to read it. And if you have something in very small font, text only, many people will strain to read it and after some time give up and then say, okay, I can't figure out what's happening. So it's important for you to ensure that it's readable from a distance, and therefore don't pack it with text from top to bottom where it's not readable. Use visuals, use 3D drawings. And if you have, I know BIG is expecting you to come in with an idea that's validated and not a POC or prototype. But I've seen many people who created a prototype or a dummy and have brought it, and when you can bring it to the room, pass it around, it makes a big difference. So do what you can to enhance the visual appeal and show and tell aspect of your presentation. I want to give you a completely different example of how to involve the audience in show and tell. This is a very famous story. Bill Gates, as you know, is very active in global health, particularly in areas like malaria. So he was making a presentation at TED Global some years ago. And this was in Can I request everyone to go on mute, please? There's a bad feedback happening. Can everyone go on mute, please? Yeah. So he was making a presentation on malaria to TED global audience in Canada. And he said, look, all of you sitting in the Western world here have never been exposed to malaria. So he carried this jar, he opened it, it was full of mosquitoes. He's saying, since you've never experienced malaria, I want you to experience it. And he opened the jar so that the audience would be able to empathize better. So it obviously, people knew that he was not being serious, but it still jolts people into attention. So think about what you are doing, the work that you're doing. For example, if you're doing work in agri-tech, which is also part of BIG, and you're working hypothetically with sugarcane plants, for example, maybe you want to carry some sugarcane into the room to just make a point. So I'm saying find a way to do show and tell so people relate to your work better beyond just the slide that you're showing. So this was my first message, show and tell. The second message was uh, try and introduce a small dose of personal story and humor. I have seen people who are working on uh, medical devices that are to do with cancer detection or brain hemorrhage detection or diagnostic kits that are diagnosing something. And very often they have a personal story of why they decided to focus on that area of work. Maybe someone in the family was adversely impacted, or there was some other reason they focused on that area of research. It does not do any harm if you bring in that bit of personal story that describes your motivation, why you decided to pursue that field of work with respect to your invention. If you can, introduce a little bit of humor because the room is serious. Remember, the jury, the expert committee is meeting from morning 9 a.m. to evening 6 p.m. They're listening to umpteen presentations during the day. Beyond the point, it gets heavy for them. So, without being silly, if you introduce a little bit of humor in your presentation, people will remember it as long as it is not out of place. So my second tip to you is try and bring in a little bit of personal story, a little bit of humor, because then it makes your presentation more impactful. That was message number two. Message number three was timing. I People come into the room with 50 slides, 40 slides, 30 slides, and then try and race like a Rajdhani Express in those 7 minutes and leave the presentation incomplete at the end. So the only way to beat it is to remember this equation. You have 7 minutes. A human being speaks at the pace of 100 to 150 words a minute. That's the pace at which a human being can speak, depending on how slow or fast you speak. So that means and you have to decide whether you're a slow speaker or a fast speaker. You can speak a maximum of 750 to 1100 words in a minute. So I'm going to seriously suggest to you write down the script for what you're going to speak on that day, rehearse it, and time it. When you write down your script, ensure that it is no more than 750 to 1100 words. Practice it several times to ensure that it does not exceed 7 minutes. Again, for the same reason, because you have all of 7 minutes, I don't think you can go more than 12 slides. Otherwise, if even with 12 slides, you're practically presenting 2 slides per minute. Look at what kind of superhuman effort that's going to require. Therefore, going beyond 12 slides is not a good idea. You have to script it, have to rehearse it by the timing. That's the only way you can ensure that you use the 7 minutes well. The final tip I want to leave you is this practice. Even someone who is globally well known as a superb presenter, Steve Jobs, he would practice and practice and practice before going on stage. Whereas a lot of young entrepreneurs I know do not practice it before the actual presentation. They finish their slides at the last moment and then go up on stage and present it and then fumble, struggle with the timing. My biggest story is a joke I have seen where there were two founders going to a pitch presentation. The presentation was incomplete. One of the co-founders was sitting as the pillion rider. On the way to the client meeting, as a pillion rider, he's still finishing his slides. How can you ever do a good job if you're going to finish it at the last moment? Your pitch presentation must be ready at least a week before you present. And during that week, rehearse and rehearse and rehearse umpteen number of times. Time it. That's the only way you can ensure that you use your 7 minutes well. With that, I'm going to conclude and simply by saying all the best. I'm sure that all of you are great inventors, and I'm equally sure you'll be great pitch presenters also. Thank you very much. And towards the end, if Aditi gives us time, we can do some Q&A.
Thank you so much, Srikant, for such an insightful presentation. And yet it was very light. I mean, the content and everything was just, very, very optimum. So I think, you actually, I believe that a good leader is the one who knows the way, goes the like shows the way and goes the way, and you've done all three of them. So thanks Srikant. And I agree
Welcome.
that I have seen every like all the successful people that I've known in my life so far. I see them making their presentation at least a day prior to the final pitching, and they would rehearse, they would time it. Even uh, like my master supervisor, he used to practice his every lecture a day prior to his main lecture. And I mean, that's how I have seen all the successful people, uh, no matter what stage of life they are at, how successful they are, they would always practice their presentation. And in fact, even Srikant, despite he being extremely busy, he took time out and made a presentation, customized it primarily to considering the audience in mind. And we've had couple of discussion back and forth and how what should be the content and stuff. So thanks Srikant. I'm really glad. So now I would like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Neha Arya. And yes, she is a doctor. She did her PhD from IIT Kanpur, the Department of Biological Science and Bioengineering. Then she was at AIMS Bhopal for some time, wherein she was the DST Inspire Fellow. And now she has joined NIPER Ahmedabad as assistant professor, right, Neha?
Yes.
And she got BIG grant in the 13th call for proposal. And yeah, so Neha would primarily be sharing her experience, how she successfully pitched her idea without a significant amount of preliminary data, which is nowadays experts look for concrete, apart from the idea itself, they prefer to have concrete preliminary data, and then usually the applicant gets the BIG fund. But Neha very tactfully handled that situation, and yes, she got the fund. So Neha, over to you.
Thank you, Aditi.
Yeah.
Thank you for the nice introduction, and I will be sharing my slides. Although it has been very well explained by Srikant about the art of pitching, but I'll try to explain and walk you through my experience as a big grantee, and how I managed through this through the entire tenure of grant submission, followed by the technical evaluation round, and then followed by expert screening committee meetings. So, so apart from being a faculty at NIPER, I am a founder of Novatech Biosolution, and what we do is we work towards personalized chemotherapy platforms. So, before I discuss about my journey in getting the big grant, I would just apprise you of what actually we are doing at Novatech. So we're trying to develop screening platform for breast and cervical cancer, primarily because these are the leading causes of cancer-related incidences as well as deaths in Indian population. And a study in Lancet had shown that India still has a low breast cancer survival rate of around 66%, while in the West it's close to 95%. So we still need to, move to reach that 90%. And so this was my problem statement. And the platforms available these days, or that have been used by clinicians, are based on details from the previous clinical trials, as well as it depends on the patient's response rates and the patient's health. So all of that put together is what a radiation oncologist or a surgical oncologist probably, would move ahead with the chemotherapy regimen. However, you might be hearing about people that there are often cases where there is recurrence or patients do not respond to the chemotherapy that is given to them. So which means that one size fits all usually fails at the bedside, and which also strengthens the fact that if there are 10 patients of breast cancer with the same stage and grade of tumor, they would not respond in a similar way. And all of this results in decreased patient survival, costs, as well as side effects. So what solution we have is we've come up with an idea wherein we would intervene in between the diagnosis of cancer in a patient as well as the treatment planning, using a platform called as microtumor tech, which is kind of a pre-screening of the chemotherapy as suggested by the clinicians on the 3D models of the patient-derived cancer cells. And based on the response of chemotherapy drugs we get on these preclinical models or these patient-derived tumoroids, we would suggest the treatment course to the clinician. Okay, so that is where we would like to intervene, and that's like the major story what we are planning to do and what we are actually doing at Novatech. So moving ahead towards the main agenda of today's discussion, which is towards perfect pitching. And as I mentioned previously, most of the points have been very well covered by Srikant. Now, there are certain points which I would also like to suggest that while I was, moving ahead towards towards actually pitching in the for the big grant, which actually had two rounds. One was the technical evaluation meeting, and the second was the expert screening committee meeting, wherein it was required that we need to do our homework well. Now, what do I mean by homework is that apart from being like, as we saw that most of us are scientists here, and most of us, can do good in doing literature search, but that's not enough. You need to understand the problem well, the solution, and what are the competitors that are probably available in the field who are probably doing equally well, and what they are not doing is where you can pitch in and, move ahead with your idea. So as you're presenting, you need to be very enthusiastic about your idea or product. You need to be in love with what you're doing. If you're not doing that, then you're probably not pitching well enough. Then what is another important point is that whatever you're presenting, it has to be concise yet unique. So you get only 8 minutes for presentation, and in 8 minutes, you have to start from, in a storytelling fashion, you have to start from the problem to the solution to some technical details of that, maybe what timelines you're proposing for the work, the team members that you're associated with, and so on, and as well as the revenue model. And all of that has to be covered well in 8 minutes. Okay, so this has to be very concisely presented, and you should also be ready with these three important things, that the three whys, that why your product or why this product. Okay, and why at this hour of today's scenario, and why should it be given to you. So these are the things that are important, which you need to know while you are preparing your idea or your product for pitching in the big grant. Then what is also important is that you need to be desperate that you really want this grant, but at the same time you need to be calm. So there has to be a balance between both of them. And also you need to be confident about what you're presenting. You need to believe in your idea. Okay, so and there are certain key questions which one can already anticipate, because whatever you put on your slides, the first few questions or maybe at least half of the questions would come from whatever you've already shown in your presentation. So these are the questions which you can already anticipate and prepare. And however, the other questions which you don't know what can come along will all depend on your preparedness while you've practiced. Okay, so the other important part, and was mentioned previously as well, that you need to practice. Now, practice does not mean that you have to memorize it well, but you need to have key pointers ready with you. Okay, and because if at all you are you stopped in between or you get distracted, and if you've memorized it, then you will not be able to get back to the point. So practice is important, but not over memorization. And you should also be prepared to be interrupted in between. And another important fact is that your body language and appearance does a lot of task while you're pitching. So while if your idea is perfect, it's bang on, you've done a great job in making a perfect deck. However, you've not been able to tell the story well, and your body language is not appropriate, then all of it, would not help you pass through. And so what is a perfect pitch? So actually there's nothing called a perfect pitch. It's like the right pitch at, with the right idea presented at the right platform to the right people. Okay, and so that is all that constitutes the perfect pitch. And so when you go through these, which I assume that all you guys will probably pass through the initial round of grant writing, and you will prepare for the technical evaluation round as well as the expert screening committee round. Therein, BIRAC has been very helpful, wherein they provide you with a deck of or pointers that you should have in your presentation, like USP, background, proposed solution, and so on. So they provide you with basic infrastructure, but you need to prepare your deck well, which should be clean, beautiful, and concise, consisting of all of these problems, like your USP, your problem statement, the proposed solution, market size, which plays a very important role, then competition. How I place the competition in my presentation was in form of tabulated form, wherein I presented some key pointers listing down the criteria that are important for the proposed solution, and then what are the competitors available, and what all things they've done. So I put a check on those things which are provided by the already existing competitors, and what my product or my device or my service would probably do, which the existing competitors are not doing. At this point of time, even price was an important factor. Then as far as the business model or revenue model is concerned, this was of more importance in the second round, which was the expert screening committee meeting, wherein it was important not to talk just about the manufacturing or commercialization strategies, the fixed or the variable assets, but also what was important was that how much time and money of the customers was utilized. For example, in our case, we were trying to develop platform for personalized chemotherapy. So what is important is time plays a very important role more than money. Okay, and supposing a chemotherapy is given to patient, and the response rate can be found out only after few cycles of chemotherapy, which is say 2 to 3 months. However, in our system or the platform which we are developing, we can get to that level in say a week or 10 days. So that's the time frame we were trying to save from the patient's point of view. Okay, so that was an important aspect. Then talking about milestones, so these the milestones are also important, and I presented them in form of a Gantt chart. So somewhere between 3 to 5 milestones is good enough to within for this 18-month time frame of the big grant. And with those 3 to 5 milestones, I had sub objectives within each milestone, which I presented in form of a Gantt chart, and which made the picture clear to the the committee on the other side, that how we will be going about for this entire process in these 18 months. Another important parameter which I focused was on team members. So what is important to realize is that you should have a team, a list of team that is manageable. Okay, you shouldn't have say 20 members in a team, and each member who is present in the team should have fixed or dedicated roles. Just because somebody is your friend, cannot be a part of the team if they don't have any specified role. And what is also important is that there should be coherence in team. So which I'll be coming up in the next slide, what I mean by coherence within the team members. So this was also presented previously, that your idea should be like a storyteller. You should modulate your pitch, the way you're telling the story. It should have a lot of pictorial. You should modulate the pace, and maybe start up with a punchline like I had in case like from that Lancet story. Similarly, you could also have something like that. And since the committee members, they go through at least say hundreds of presentations, and why should they remember your pitch? Only if you convey them a single focused message from that. They should remember, okay, yeah, these guys came up and some personalized chemotherapy platforms is what they were talking about. So some message should come out from your entire presentation. And instead of having some long boring sentences, include a lot of schemes and graphs in your deck. And make sure that the colors you use they're not like jazzy colors. You don't use a lot of colors in the presentation. The fonts should also be readable enough, and as well as the contrast. So these are the few do's and don'ts which I referred to while I prepared my presentation, that I had around like one topic per slide. If you're talking of background, it should only be that, and not, solution also somehow fitted into it. Have it in form of pictorial presentation, use some fonts and colors, and spell check is really, really important. Okay, so I feel this is a very important aspect of for pitching. Then you shouldn't have long sentences, don't have a lot of sounds or flying animations, and don't keep using caps or bolds or italics or underline in all your sentences. One or two is okay, but not like throughout your presentation. And avoid using different types of fonts through the presentation. So how I cracked the big, I think I was lucky enough that I cracked it. But okay, jokes apart, I tried to present the idea in the given time frame. I practiced my pitch at least maybe 5 to 6 times before I moved ahead in front of the committee. And as mentioned by Srikant, that people prepare their presentation at least a week in advance. So the last round, that is the expert screening committee round from for this from the BIRAC, they actually make sure that you finish your you provide your presentation to them at least 5 to 6 days in advance. So that means you cannot make any changes after you've sent them the presentation, and your presentation round is after 5 to 6 days. So that is the time for you, given to you for practicing, for making sure that whatever you've put in the deck comes out in form of storytelling. So at this point of time, I would actually like to thank SIIC as well as my business mentor, who was also, came through the SIIC for all the mocks as well as the critical feedback we got. So and especially this given time frame of 8 minutes was very crucial. And while my idea showed the potential, I was very clear about it, about the novelty, about what market space we are trying to cater to. And another important aspect was the collaborator. So as I mentioned about the team members, we were trying to develop this platform in which we wanted patient samples. So we understood this well in advance, and we had clinical collaborators as part of the team members. So that made our task a bit easy, because there were certain questions which were anticipated by the clinical collaborators as well, and which we already had in our mind while we moved ahead in these screening, in these rounds. So and the second point which I mentioned was of team coherence. So supposing four people from a team go and present for pitch for one presentation, and one of them is probably presenting it. However, at the question answer round, where all four of you can participate, you have to make sure that you do not cut through your colleague. Whatever the person is trying to ask, or trying to answer, if even if the answer is not the perfect answer that person is given, you can try to add your answer to his, so that it appears in form of a coherent story, or a coherence between the team members, apart from coming like, okay, this person, they just can't work together because this person, whatever he was answering, the other one was just not believing in his answer. So it shouldn't come across in that manner. Okay. And yeah, so although I had a bit of preliminary data, but I made sure that the collaborators, this coherence with the team, and how I answered and prepared my deck was probably I was very clear about it, and I passed it across to the committee in the best way I could. And that's how I cracked the big. So with this, I would like to thank you, and I'll be happy to answer questions if any. And you could contact me at this email ID. Uh, and with this, I would like to thank you.
Thanks, Neha. Thank you so much. So we would open the forum for questions. If anyone want to know anything from Srikant or Neha, quickly show me a raise of hand. You can use the reaction tool for that, or you can type in your question in the chat box. Okay, so we have one question from Deepen. I'll just read it aloud. How much weightage team carries? Asking because sometimes there's a dilemma that having a good team helps in fund grant raising, and sometimes it is the other way around. That is, you can build a good team once you have the funds or grant. So Neha, maybe would you like to take this question?
Okay, so I think having a good team is really important, and it depends at which stage of your of the product you are you're at. If you're at a very preliminary stage where it's just the idea and you have to still generate the proof of concept, then having a team, a good team is important, who I mean, the committee needs to believe in that, okay, this particular team can actually move, can move to the POC easily, because they have these ABC people in the team who are capable enough of answering the or who are capable enough of reaching to the POC level. And however, when we talk of further fundraising, maybe then having people from the from the market point of view or commercialization point of view can be added on. But if you're at the POC level, then I think having a good team, in terms of the one who would help you believe, help the committee believe in you, that yes, they will be able to complete this idea in stipulated time, is important. So that's what I think.
Yeah, if I may add to this, I think when you're asking for 50 lakhs over a 18-month period, and even to get to the POC, if you need to add one significant person to your team, you haven't done it so far because you don't have the money to do it. So what you can do, but you may have identified such a person who may be informally helping you at this point of time. So you should put up that person's name with a clear indication that currently he is helping you on a limited best effort basis. But uh, if the grant funding comes through, then over the next 18 months, that person will either go spend full time, part time, or whatever, and that you build into the budget. So you can present part of the team which is conditional to funding, but you should have made the effort to identify people who will be part of that team. Very clearly, everyone understands that right now you may not have the money to have those great people, but if you get the money, you can get those people on board. But at least you should have the names and profiles out there.
Yeah. Somnath, I see you raised your hand. Somnath,
Yeah,
please unmute
yeah,
yourself
yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah, hello, ma'am. I just wanted to ask two questions. One question is, at present, I'm planning to apply for big, but I'm only the PI. Like nobody else is working. Most of the part is my own. But I've got a lot of advisors and mentors. So, do they make a strong team?
Uh,
Okay. So yeah.
Aditi,
Oh,
you want to take it first? Go ahead.
no. Go ahead, Srikant, please.
No, I think I'm assuming that as the PI, the idea has been yours, and whatever work you've done, IP you built
Yes,
out is entirely yours, right?
yes, mine, sir.
Correct?
That's why.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's fine. So you're a good person. You've done that so far. Now, going forward in the next
Uh
18
huh.
months,
Yeah.
to get to the POC stage, what are
Yes,
the
sir.
additional capabilities that you need to bring into the team? Are you clear about that? Can you do it entirely on your own, or you need to add a few people?
Yeah, sir. So the problem you have already told before that before keep a person on salary, I cannot have him. So like eventually, can I show that if I get the grant, then only I can keep somebody
Yeah.
employed?
Yeah. So you
And
need to be clear about what kind of person or persons you need to bring on board in order to
okay, sir.
complete the POC successfully. You
Okay,
should
sir.
put up saying, look, personally, these are the skills I have. This part of the POC, I will be able to get it done completely. There is this
Uh-huh.
part of the POC which requires a certain specialized skill for which I have identified person A, and you can ideally share that person's profile, and ideally you should have had a conversation with that person that if the BIG grant comes in, he's willing to come on
Hmm.
board and spend the timing. So share the profile, talk about that person's availability and willingness to come on board once the funding comes in.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. So
Yeah,
one
and
last question.
I
That
would
is
like to
like
add to
how?
this.
Yeah, yeah.
Somnath, the thing is that you can already mention about whom you want to hire in terms of the manpower in the
Uh-huh.
initial grants. So
Okay,
therein,
okay.
you can mention that the you supposing you need two people as manpower. So those details
Uh-huh.
can already be jotted down while you are applying for the grant.
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So one more question I wanted to ask, since the time is very less, like only 7 minutes, how much of data do you think we should, show?
So listen,
Uh,
if you look at those
yeah.
5 bullet points that I showed, those are things that you need to cover in your presentation.
Uh-huh.
And therefore, obviously, that data that you have is important to show that you have a great innovation, which is backed by underlying data. That underlying data will support your innovation. So I'm
Uh-huh.
guessing, I don't, it would be hard for me to put a number and say 3 out of 12 slides should be data,
Okay,
or
okay.
five
Uh-huh.
out of,
Uh-huh.
it's hard to say that. Whatever is
Yeah.
required to make a compelling argument for the fact that you have a great innovation.
Thank you. So what actually we mean
I
by
think I think
POC?
we should get other people to ask questions
Yeah,
now,
yeah, yeah.
Somnath, because
So I just write in the chat box, sir, if
yeah,
there is
please,
time,
please,
please.
please, yeah.
Thank
So,
you. Thank you very much, sir.
so we have another question from Dr. J. Krishna. He says that he pitched an idea to Tata AIG VP, and he liked his idea and asked many questions, wherein he was able to answer most of the question. He got stuck at one part wherein he was asked, "What will you do with the money in next 6 months, other than the POC?" So he wants us to guide him in this line.
Okay. So,
Um,
Dr. Krishna, I'm not sure what was your product or invention, but I'm guessing that since you were talking to someone at who's a vice president at Tata AIG, it is a slightly different situation compared to a BIG expert committee. Now, a BIG expert committee uses a certain set of criteria where the innovation and the underlying science is the most important, and even the POC definition is more from a standpoint of what technology readiness level it is at. And Aditi can answer Somnath separately what TRL stage POC is defined as. But when you would have met the Tata AIG gentleman, he would have approached it from the standpoint of a normal commercial investor. So there, typically what they would expect to see is that you have they would be looking for progress. Have you made progress on the product front, which is the POC part that BIG is referring to? But the Tata AIG gentleman would also expect you to have made progress on the customer front. Have customers seen your product, liked it, adopted it? Are they giving good feedback? So he would expect that as an additional hypothesis to get validated. So, whereas in the BIG case, the proof of concept is essentially a hypothesis validation for the technology, the product, etc. In the context of commercial investors, they would also expect validation from market and customers. So, that is the fundamental difference or additional factor you need to build in. Does that answer your question?
Dr. Krishna, does this answer your question?
Yeah, he said yes. He said yes.
Okay, okay, cool. Next, we move on to Sandhar Kumar. He wants to know how should we go about the business part in the presentation? What should be the ingredients in the business part? Being researchers, we are not good at putting the business angle in the presentation. Neha, would you like to take this up?
Yeah, I think Neha would be a good person to answer this because she's done this more recently. She comes from a research background herself. So her answer would be accurate and more current, actually.
Yeah, so Sandarbh, with this question, I would like to answer it as following. Coming from research, my entrepreneurial skills at this time also I'm learning, but at that time I was almost, zero at zero level probably, So at SISC was helpful in a way that they helped us with in connecting us with some business mentor who was, very instrumental in providing us how the business plan needs to be done. So, and what my business plan we talked of was, you need to talk of two parts. One is what are the transactions that can generate, which incur cost, A, and what are the transactions that can help you in generation of revenue. Okay, so basically you have, say, a manufacturing unit, and from there, you do some kind of experiment, say, in your lab, which is probably development of kit or some service. And then you should talk about, the revenue in terms of, say, government, any hospitals or clinicians or, some kind of patients. So that kind of interaction is what is important. So two things. One is how you would talk about where all the costs are involved, and secondly, how can you generate revenue. So these are the 2 points which I focused on in my in the business plan. This was, as I mentioned previously, this was done in connection with one of the business mentor. So, yeah. Is that, does that answer your question, or should I elaborate?
Yeah, he said thank you. Then we have a question from Somnath again. Somnath, you want to know what are the qualities required for a POC? I don't know. Can you please unmute yourself and elaborate your question, explain your question a bit?
Yeah, ma'am. So I wanted to know where a product actually crosses the POC level and goes to the next level, and where up to which extent do you think that is a POC? Suppose I am making a nutraceutical product. So can you give me an answer regarding a nutraceutical product? Suppose we started with the extraction of the bio ingredients, then we formulated it, then again gone for stability studies and all. So where we up to which extent it is POC?
Okay. So, Neha, do you want to take this question, or should I answer?
I think you can answer, and I can
okay,
join you later.
Cool. So, basically, if you're working towards developing a novel nutraceutical, primarily,
Yes.
as you said, that it begins with extraction or isolation of a particular compound from a particular
Yes.
source, which would have some novel properties.
Yes,
which
yes.
would have some intended use,
Yeah.
either
Health
for
benefits.
for human health benefits, or animal or birds or
Ha, ha,
shrimp,
ha.
or it would
Yes,
have
yes.
a particular category for the end users.
Ha, ha,
So
ha.
the uh, process of POC would primarily be the ideal stage wherein you can consider applying for BIGs. You've
Ha, ha.
identified at least the compound or the chemical that you've extracted and
Ha,
has
ha.
seen certain properties. For example, maybe it could have good, it might have some anti-carcinogenic properties,
Ha,
just
ha,
for
ha.
an
Okay,
example.
okay.
And
Ha,
you've
ha, ha.
seen, you have the data for the anti-carcinogenic property,
Okay, okay.
but
Ha,
you've
ha, ha.
not completely characterized the extract that you have
Ha, ha, ha.
isolated from the strain.
Okay.
So the
Ha, ha.
characterization part and further validation, which might involve either the cell line, which is the in vitro validation, or
Hmm,
the
hmm, hmm.
validation on animal. Because even although there are less regulations for nutraceutical, but still
Ha,
you
ha.
need to conduct a proper validation study. So the POC would
Okay.
primarily be the collecting all the supporting data for the claims that you are making for that nutraceutical. So that would
Okay,
be your
okay.
POC. And
Okay.
validation would come just after POC, wherein you have collected all the data from your lab, and now you want to do it, validate it either by a third party or on a further follow-up animal
Okay.
model. Yeah,
That answers me right. Thank you very much.
cool. Okay, now maybe this could be the last question, because we've already 7 minutes. We've crossed the time. So, Rajiv, what if we propose some aspect of my project to be outsourced to a service and commit to some further during time of product development that some is not adequate? How to deal in such situation? Can we ask Bharat to support for more funding? So, Rajiv, maybe I would answer to that question. There's a component for outsourcing a certain part of your product development, and BIREC gives you up to 20% of your total budget that has been approved for outsourcing. And BIG budget is quite stringent. You cannot, even if uh, your outsourcing expenses are more than what is approved by BIREC and your BIG partner, BIREC will not be able to extend any further financial support to you. What can be done in this situation is, if we can utilize the money from other budget heads, for example, the IP, the budget for travel or consumables, if we can somehow take some portion from that budget and fill in the expenses for the outsourcing. So that can be done. Again, BIG partner usually facilitate that part. So that's how it works with BIREC and BIG. Rajiv, I hope I answered your question. Yeah, cool. So yeah, I think we don't have any more questions. I would like to thank Srikant and Neha for, again, yeah, for the wonderful session that you guys gave.
Thanks, Aditi. Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone.
Thank you, Aditi.
Neha, good to meet you. Thanks.
Same
Bye.
here, Srikant. Thank you.